Welcome back to Our Community. Susie Thomas visiting with Peter Trumpauer, talking gardening here on Our Community. All right, so far we've only talked about the unusual trees you have. Let's move along to the side of the house, and you've just got the most beautiful garden, and as you say, so productive that I think we all envy this. So tell us what you've got growing there.
Okay, thank you. So one of the things that I really focused on when we moved to our house was eliminating everything that was there in the first place. I always like to start with a blank canvas.
Okay.
And I like working with stone and things like that. So I basically stripped everything off of the yard and then focused on redeveloping the landscaping with the intent of incorporating as many edibles as possible. Mm-hmm. Now, when you start reading some of the books and literature, they'll talk about what they call permaculture. So permanent agriculture, very easy to think of course, fruit trees and things like that. Mm-hmm. There are lots of shrubs and other plants that produce edibles. And so
that we don't think of as edible.
That's right. You don't typically think of. So a really easy one that's super productive, even someone that's not a green thumb can grow quite easily, daylilies.
I never would have thought you could eat those.
So virtually the entire daylily plant is usable and edible. So you can dig the tubers, and anyone that's had a daylily patch knows that they spread somewhat rapidly.
Yes, they do.
And they need divided. So when you dig them, there are small tubers, maybe about half the size of your thumb, let's say. Mm-hmm. You can eat them just like new potatoes.
Really?
So you can clean them and roast them. And they have a really interesting, like, nutty flavor. Mm-hmm. So last year at the Lake Cable plant sale, we had samples of the tubers that we'd roasted off as handouts as part of our plant sale.
And were people just so surprised of what they were eating?
They were. So everyone thought they were really interesting and that they would have never thought to eat those tubers.
Yeah.
So the tubers are excellent.
And treat it like a potato.
Absolutely.
Whatever you would do to a potato, do to a daylily tuber.
The unopened flower buds can be picked when they're small, and those can be blanched and sautéed.
Really?
And so they have, nice green flavor to them. Mm-hmm. The flowers, of course, are only out for one day. You can pick them, pull the stamen and pistils out of them, and then use those for something like a stuffed cheese, or you could batter them and cook them that way.
Ooh, tempura.
So, yes, tempura.
Wow.
So very versatile, very common garden plant.
And you're talking about using the entire plant.
That pretty much.
That's
so when
amazing.
they come up in the spring, the new shoots, most plants that are edible, the shoot is the part that's in early spring. And of course, you pick the shoot, you pick the later crop as well. Mm-hmm. So part of it is, and my approach is, I've added these plants. Many of them, they're in sort of the propagation phase, so I'm not harvesting them yet. Mm-hmm. Something like daylilies, they grow everywhere. You can go out and forage them yourself.
Now, there's a difference, I would think, between something that you can eat, it wouldn't hurt you, or something that you really, really want to eat. Where does this fall on that spectrum?
Well, and that, I would say, middle.
Okay, all right. Nutritional value of a daylily?
It's actually pretty high.
Really? Good.
So, I would rate the tubers higher than the flower buds, mm-hmm. just from a flavor standpoint. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of plants you can pick. Let's say if you're in the spring, you're trying to forage a salad, and I love greens. And
like a dandelion salad.
Another super common, mm-hmm. most people are familiar with dandelion greens. Again, mm-hmm. if you buy them at a store or a farmer's market, you just have to make sure it's from a pet-free zone.
Yes, you're right.
But what matters is the timing of a lot of things. So just like any fruit or vegetable that people are familiar with, there's a peak time and a time that it's past its prime. And so there's certain things you want to pick in the spring. Again, anything that's in the growth phase. So, for instance, redbud, very common, very attractive small tree or shrub.
Mm-hmm.
The buds themselves are edible, and typically if you're like building a spring salad, you could add those because they're definitely giving you a pop of color,
Yeah.
but also crunchy.
Yeah, right.
So just something interesting to add to the salad.
Mm-hmm.
The bean pods that grow on the redbud when they're still green and fresh are edible. And there's a lot of parts of plants that are usable. And so part of it is, as gardeners, you have to learn certainly the plant, but then the season.
Right, because I know some things that are edible and wonderful. I'm thinking of rhubarb, but there's parts that you would not want to eat, like the leaf.
That's
only
a great
the stalk.
Example. So rhubarb is a great example. So again, when we talk about perennial vegetables, that's another thing. If you get online, Google perennial vegetables, you'll see a long list of these. So what I've done is try to incorporate as many of those as possible. So you have a patch of rhubarb started, it lasts essentially forever.
Right.
So I have asparagus, things like that growing.
Nice.
So I'm probably about 3/4 perennial and maybe 1/4 annual.
You've got some books that you would recommend.
Sure.
Where we can find out some of these things. I'm thinking of the person who's saying, this is different than farming. This is a great idea. Where can we go for more information?
Well, and it's definitely different than farming or traditional gardening. So I'm trying to blend permaculture and foraging. So the idea is, foraging is becoming more popular.
Right.
But my thought is I want to be able to forage in my yard.
Yeah.
And so you're saving driving everywhere and time certainly, plus
A lot of money.
Freshness because it's immediately picked. So one of the best books I think for people to get started is called Midwest Foraging.
Okay.
And it's by Lisa M. Rose. It's an excellent book because it's very readable. It's in small sections by plants. It's also organized by season, so you can learn what to pick, and it also has some habitat information in it. So I really tried to focus on the plants in that book in my yard.
Nice.
As many as possible.
Midwest foraging. So honestly, since that's where we live, this would be the types of plants that would do well in our kind of soil as well, in our area.
Absolutely. So they're native to our region and, of course, our climate. So you really feel like if you are trying to grow some of these, you have a pretty good shot.
This is a good place to start.
Good place to start.
You got another one?
Now, there's another book that is a bit more technical, but still a good read, called The Forager's Harvest.
Okay.
And that is by Samuel Thayer. That book is more focused on greens.
Okay.
And different types of plants that you're eating the foliage.
So do you honestly go out into your yard and you just start picking things, and that's what's for dinner?
Oh, absolutely. That's what I'm
so cool.
trying to do.
Yeah.
And I think, again, you can find, if you look through these books and look online, you can also find things that they're attractive too. So people want an attractive landscape. So if something that's got an attractive flower or a nice colored leaf on it. So I've tried to incorporate those as well. And a big thing in landscaping is texture. So if you have different heights, different seasons that things are at their peak, different leaf shapes and textures, it makes for a very interesting landscape. And then if you're working with sun and shade and maybe, part sun, you have to figure out which plants go where. And then to make it a little more complicated, if you start getting into things like blueberries,
Right.
they are acid loving and an extra level of challenge.
So you need to know what needs to go where, not just for aesthetics, but to make the plants do the best that they can do.
There's all parts of that. So it's really plant, grow, thrive.
Yeah.
And if by the third year it's not thriving, you know you have an
Rearrange
issue.
things.
It's maybe in a bad spot, the soil's not proper, it's not getting enough light or too much light.
Well, there's more to it than light and soil and rain. I start to think about what can we spray these things with to keep bugs away that won't be harmful to us? What kind of fertilizers are good? What do you do?
Well, I am absolutely adamant about organic and being pesticide free.
Yes.
So the biggest thing on the fertilizer end is building and rebuilding your soil. So, of course, I have a compost heap. I put yard waste into it. I put fish into it. I also put whatever's appropriate from the household, like eggshells and coffee grounds, things like that. These were very common. We had one, of course, growing up.
Sure.
So we didn't want to fill the trash up and pay to have it hauled off. But that's a great way to create your own
Nice.
amendments for your soil. You definitely have to pay attention to the soil. I rotate the crops, the annual crops. So I plant everything in raised rows. Some things like corn pull nitrogen. Other things like beans put nitrogen back into the soil. So I'm always rotating. And then sanitation's a big thing. So if you have some kind of issue that you're picking away the leaves, things like that. And then year to year, I do crop rotation. Like I had an issue with cucumber beetles. So I didn't plant them for 1 year, or you change location. So there's things you can do smart in that regard. They're also non-toxic to us, at least.
That's important.
Sprays that you can use, organic sprays that aren't bad for the environment.
Just look for those.
Absolutely.
Find them
so any
online.
garden center what can point you to that. So something.
Is there anything we might find in our kitchen, like vinegar? I don't know. Is there anything that we can
Well,
use?
there are some of those. Now you have to realize if you're going to use vinegar and salt with water as a diluted weed killer, that it's not going to be as effective as spraying Roundup everywhere.
Right, but we don't want Roundup.
No, so you have to live with that. So,
Yeah.
like for instance, my lawn, I don't treat it. It's probably half weeds, but that's okay. There's lots of lightning bugs at night and other things.
You know what, Peter? I always wondered who decided that weeds were bad, because they're beautiful, they're green, they're lush, they grow so easily. Who decided the thing that's easy to grow, we want to yank that up? The thing that's hard to grow, that's what we want.
Well, and that's it. It's part of the aesthetic. And
Yeah.
so we've all been ingrained with this thought that you have this beautiful carpet lawn, but in fact, a lot of what you consider weeds in your lawn are edible.
Right.
So you have violets that are coming up in the spring, or plantains, or certainly dandelions, things like that actually produce some form of edible.
Yeah, that's right. Keeping that in mind. One of my favorite movies, Please Don't Eat the Daisies, and now we're saying, no, please
Go
do.
ahead.
That's right. That's right. Peter Trumpauer, a local gardener, thank you so much for the beauty that you are adding to our community.
Oh, you're welcome.